Today we're going to be talking about the cosine function. So once you understand the sine function, that makes the cosine function that much easier. So let's look at the properties of the cosine function. Again, we're going to have that generic form of y equals a cosine b theta, where a is not zero. It can be a positive or it can be a negative, but it can't be zero. B is going to be greater than zero, so b is always positive, and theta is in radians. So once again, just like with sine, the absolute value of a is the amplitude of the function. B is the number of cycles in the interval from 0 to 2 pi, and 2 pi over b is the period of the function. So we're going to have 5 points, again, that are equally spaced through one cycle, and that's going to give us the cosine curve. So if I have a greater than 0, the pattern is going to be max 0, min 0, max. So with the sine, you always started at 0. With the cosine, you're going to start at your maximum point if your a is greater than 0. You're going to start at your minimum point if a is less than 0. So let's look at what are the domain, period, range, and amplitude of the cosine function. So here is a graph of our cosine function, just taking it straight off the unit circle, which means that my max and mins will be 1 and negative 1. And then if we divide that into our 5 equal pieces, it's going to go from 0 to pi over 2 to pi to 3 pi over 2 to 2 pi. So the domain, that's going to be my x values. Well, this is a sine wave, and it just keeps going on and on and on and on, and it repeats the same type of wave pattern. So for the domain of this function, it's going to be all real numbers, which will be the same case with the sine, because the sine just goes through 0, but it continues on and on and on also. What is the period of this? Well, there's one complete cycle, because I've got max 0, min 0, max, so the period is 2 pi. What is the midline? Okay, so that's going to be what is halfway between my max and my min. So the midline is going to be this line right here, which is y equals 0, which is the x-axis. What is the range? Well, on the y-axis, it's going to go from 1 to negative 1, and that's it. So negative 1 is less than or equal to y, which is less than or equal to, that should be a 1. So 1. That is my range. Now, amplitude. Remember, I think in section 13.2, we figured out how to find amplitude. So that's going to be 1/2 the max minus the min. So 1/2 1 minus negative 1, which will be 1/2 2, which is 1. So what kind of problems can we encounter? Well, pretty much everything we did with sine, we're going to do with cosine. But let's just do one for practice. Let's try sketching the graph of a cosine function. So we're going to sketch one cycle of y equals 1.5 cosine 2 theta. All right, so A is going to be 1.5. So that is my amplitude. So I know maximum is 1.5, minimum is negative 1.5. B is 2. So I'm going to have 2 full cycles between 0 and 2 pi. But they just want one cycle. So one cycle will be between 0 and pi. So let's figure out the period. 2 pi over b, 2 pi over 2, which is just pi. So the period is pi. So I will have one cycle between 0 and pi. So to find out my points, again, just like last time, I'm going to divide 0 and pi in half. That's going to give me pi over 2. I'm going to divide 0 to pi over 2 in half. That's going to give me pi over 4. And I'm going to divide pi over 2 to pi in half. That's going to give me 3 pi over 4. If it helps you to put everything in common denominators, that's 0, pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, and 4 pi over 4. So you can see how it's 5 equally divided numbers to give me those pieces. So then I'm going to say, well, A was positive, so I'm following the pattern of max 0, min 0, max, and that would be the graph of my cosine function. Okay, like always, if something doesn't make sense, run through the video again. Also, make sure that you understood sine, because if you understood sine, I broke that one down in detail. If you understand sine, then cosine will be easy. If you didn't really understand sine, then you need to talk to me, because now it's just going to keep building upon what we learned with the sine function. So if you don't understand something, send me a remind message. We can go through it together. If we need to meet live, you guys let me know and we can do that. It's just one class, so we could arrange a time to get together and talk about this if you guys feel like you need it. Ask me any questions and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.